Trump just exposed the most important aspects of the Ukraine war.
We're going to have to settle some big problems that are going on right now. We're going to have to settle up with Russia, Ukraine. That's a disaster. I look at numbers every week, the number of people being killed in that war. People don't know, mostly soldiers now.
Zelensky's on board. He says Trump has a good shot at getting a deal done with Russia to bring some peace to Ukraine.
This was a Biden fiasco that he got us. That should have never happened. If we had a real president, if we had a president that knew what he was doing, Russia would have never, ever gone in.
I don't know where you guys land on the Cato Institute, but I love a lot of the takes they have. I love their libertarian-leaning perspective. I'm a libertarian voluntarist myself, so I don't know about you guys, but I'm a real big fan of the Cato Institute, man. Donald Trump must avoid getting sucked into the Ukraine war. Donald Trump will soon be president. Washington policymakers are understandably skeptical that he will be able to fulfill his promise to end the Russo-Ukraine war in a day. Critics charge that he plans to simply pressure Kiev to yield. However, his hawkish advisors suggest otherwise. For instance, Keith Kellogg, chosen by Trump to special Ukraine war envoy, earlier described his plan for peace. We tell the Ukrainians, you've got to come to the table, and if you don't come to the table, support from the United States will dry up. And then you tell Putin, he's got to come to the table. And if you don't come to the table, then we'll give Ukrainians everything they need to offer you in the field. Possible terms included a halt in the fighting, Russian control over territory that it occupied, NATO membership for Kiev placed on hold for a decade or two, and security guarantees offered to Ukraine backed by Western peacekeepers. Like and subscribe and hit that notification bell if you enjoy the content.
Follow up on Ukraine and Iran, the two negotiations you'll be heading into. On Ukraine, you said just before it's a lot more complicated now.
Much more complicated.
Do you believe...
Because it would have never started.
Right, but it has started. You've
well,
got
not only started, the cities are largely knocked down.
So you've got what you've got. At this point, to hold on to leverage in dealing with President Putin, would you make a commitment to the Ukrainians that you will keep supporting them during the negotiations?
Well, I wouldn't tell you if that were the case.
Would you make a commitment to...
This is from NPR.org. Around half of Ukraine's energy infrastructure has been destroyed during the almost 3 years of war with Russia, and rolling electricity blackouts are widespread. Kiev's Western allies have provided Ukraine with air defense systems to help protect critical infrastructure, but Russia has sought to overwhelm the air defenses with combined strikes involving big numbers of missiles and drones. Russia has held the initiative this year, with its military steadily ramming through Ukrainian defenses in the east in a series of slow but steady offenses. It seems like Russia has done nothing but make slow and steady progress towards their goals the entire time that we've drawn out this war. So how is this good for Ukraine? Wouldn't ending the fighting as quickly as possible be the best thing we could do for Ukraine? I agree with what Trump had to say about how we played a role in provoking the Russo-Ukraine war.
So, a big part of the problem was Russia for many, many years, long before Putin said you could never have NATO involved with Ukraine. Now, they've said that. That's been, written in stone. And somewhere along the line, Biden said, no, they should be able to join NATO. Well, then Russia has somebody right on their doorstep, and I could understand their feeling about that. But there were a lot of mistakes made in that negotiation. And when I heard the way that Biden was negotiating, I said, you're going to end up in a war. And it turned out to be a very bad war. And it could escalate. That war could escalate to be much worse than it is right now.
World War III is already underway in Ukraine. If you had walked the front lines in the early weeks of the war in Ukraine, you might have heard shouts in Ukrainian and Russian, perhaps mingled with voices speaking regional languages such as Buryat or Chechen. Today, troops on either side of the line of the conflict communicate in Spanish, Nepali, Hindi, Somali, Serbian, and Korean. Foreign tongues spoken in muddy trenches are just one sign of how the conflict has taken on an increasingly international dimension. In the sky above the battlefield, an Iranian Shahed drone might be intercepted by an American air defense system, while on the ground, German-made artillery whizzes past North Korean shells. Almost 3 years in, even the most dogged isolationists would have a hard time selling the war as a regional conflict between Russia and Ukraine. What began in February 2022 as the biggest European land war since World War II now competes for the title of the most global conflict since the Cold War, with dozens of countries directly or indirectly involved. The crazy thing is how we ignore this potential for escalation, even as continuing the war has done nothing for Ukraine and only resulted in more Ukrainian loss. Like, there's nothing to win. There's nothing to gain from this.
Well, my view is that it was always understood. In fact, I believe that they had a deal, and then Biden broke it. They had a deal, which would have been a satisfactory deal to Ukraine and everybody else, but that Biden said, no, you have to be able to join NATO.
Russia never wanted Kiev. They've already got the territory and the infrastructure they wanted. This whole thing was designed to secure their ability to supply Europe with oil. They offered Ukraine a peace deal centered around Ukraine pulling out of the regions that Russia already controls. See, the frustrating thing to me is without pressure from the international community, I think Ukraine would have never ousted Yanukovych in the Maidan revolutions and would have ended up restructuring that treaty with Russia for them to lease the Crimean oil fields, and they'd be making money off the oil that Russia is selling to Europe right now, and there would be no Ukrainian lives lost, and there would be no infrastructure damage. That's how the whole situation looks from my end. See, the thing is I think the U.S. and U.S. politicians make a lot of money through shell companies that before this war were operating in those Crimean oil fields. And I think this whole thing, the Bidens in Burisma, you guys remember about Hunter Biden being on the board of Burisma, first hired as a lawyer, then promoted to being on the board of Burisma Holdings, an oil company out there in Ukraine? And so between that and our general desire to suppress Russia's economic development, the U.S. itself has an interest in keeping Russia out of those Crimean oil fields way more than Ukraine itself does. And so I think the U.S. pushed Ukraine into this war thinking that they could be a stopgap against Russian development and advancement in terms of securing a monopoly or close to a monopoly on supplying Europe with oil. Maybe I'm an idiot, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like that was really our motivations and intentions, building off of everything that we'd been doing in the Middle East, right, to secure that monopoly of oil supply around the world. And it seems we overestimated our either negotiation capacity or how quickly Russia would move in response, and we have ended up hurting Ukraine severely through this entire thing. But we've ended up enabling and enriching the oligarchs so much that we've created a Ukrainian industry around getting money from the West. And so now these people are making so much money gutting their country that they're going around in media tours saying, no, we don't care how many people we lose. Let's keep this war going.
But they did go in, and we have a mess. The cities are all blown up. The people have largely left. And the soldiers are killing each other at levels that haven't been seen since the Second World War. So we'll have to get that one straightened out, too. That's a tough one. Much tougher than it would have been before it started, I can tell you that. A deal could have been made just by an average deal maker. Deal could have been made on that.
Between Ukraine and Afghanistan, can you really argue with that assessment? Now, I will say there are some things I agree with the Cato Institute's critique of the incoming administration's approach to ending this war and starting the negotiations. This approach would likely fail while sacrificing fundamental American interests. Washington would end up even more entangled in a conflict not its own. Kiev would risk its army's collapse while relying on another round of unenforceable allied promises of support. Moscow would feel continuing pressure to escalate for advantage. It would also deepen its reliance on China and increase its assault on U.S. interests in the Middle East and Korea. The best result might be a European frozen conflict and global Cold War persisting for years or even decades. The Russo-Ukraine war is terrible, but it's a greater humanitarian than security concern for America. Ukraine has never been a serious geopolitical interest to the U.S., not under Tsarist Russia, not even under the Soviet Union, and not under post-Soviet Russia. And from where I'm sitting, both the U.S. and Ukraine would be in a stronger position against Russia if we had never played into the post-Maidan Revolution escalations. I think the Ukrainian oligarchs that have made so much money from gutting their country would have chosen to come to the negotiation table when they realized no one was willing to hand out those checks much sooner. And I think if that happened, a lot more Ukrainians and a lot more Ukrainian infrastructure would still be standing right now. Only time will tell, but I am really hoping this incoming administration is able to reverse some of the chaos around the world and make good of this promise of ending these global conflicts and bringing some peace, man. Not just here in Ukraine, but also in the Middle East, in Israel, in the Israel-Iran conflict. Hey, did you guys know Donald Trump called out Gavin Newsom for a lot of the policy changes that actually led to the severity of the wildfires in LA and the Palisades? We do a deep dive on it right here, and we also show you guys the #1 proof that mainstream media is losing their influence over our culture right here, guys. Check it out.